Good morning or good afternoon for some of you, and thank you for joining us for our Government Affairs and Association Update webinar today. I am Ashley Casey. I am the Director of Education and Professional Development here at Iiusa, and we're very glad to have you. We have a lot of great information today, and I hope that it answers some questions for you, and you're ready to gear up to be an active advocate for EB5 in the next couple of months. Before we get started, I just want to run over a few housekeeping items. First and foremost, this webinar is intended for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. We always recommend that you consult your own legal counsel with questions and concerns on this topic. And also, all the information in this webinar is deemed to be accurate and up to date as of the recording of this discussion. Also, all of our participants are in listen-only mode. If you have a question for the panelists or someone at Iiusa, please use the Q&A function you see there at the bottom of your screen. We will try to get to all of the questions. We'll likely hold all of them for the end. But if for some reason we don't get to your question, feel free to email us after the fact, but we should have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. We have quite a few of them. First and foremost, we have Iiusa's Executive Director, Aaron Grau. We also have Robert Devine, shareholder at Baker Donelson and VP Emeritus at Iiusa. Adam Green, COO at EB5 New York State. Iiusa's very own Lee, Director of Policy Research and Data Analytics. We have George McElwee and Keith Pemrick, who are founding managing partners at Commonwealth Strategic Partners and are Iiusa's government affairs consultants. And we also have Stevie Allaire of counsel at Miller Mayer and president emeritus of Iiusa. So we have a lot of great people here, and it's my pleasure to turn this now over to Aaron Grau to get things started.
Thank you, Ashley. Before I review the agenda, it's plain to see, I suppose, I'd like to note the number of registrants. We have over 300 people registered for this event. I'd also like to point out to everybody with a big thank you, the diversity. There are folks obviously from within the EB5 community, but many registrants from what I would consider part of the EB5 extended family, chambers of commerce, folks focused on economic development, trade associations whose members may be impacted by the economic downturn. I think everybody's attendance here is a clear reflection of the economic impact that the EB5 Regional Center program has and the nature of its job creating power. And I'm very grateful to have all of you join us. With regards to the presentation today, we're going to do our best to tell you what the political state of play is and how we're going to reauthorize the EB5 Regional Center program. We're going to tell you what needs to be done to get that goal, and we're going to walk you through how we're going to go about doing it. So first off, the state of play, and I'd like to move right from there to a quick recap of what happened at the end of 2020. So next slide, thank you. So before I walk you through the timeline, for clarity purposes, I wanted to share a few thoughts. Iiusa has received several inquiries since the end of 2020 with regards to why the negotiations around what we will refer to as the Grassley-Leahy bill seemed to be so quiet, why it was limited to a small team. And in the interest of transparency and making sure everybody's fully informed, I want to tell you, we were quiet simply because we were asked to be so by Hill staff. There was a concern that the work we needed to do to reach a workable legislative draft would at best be slowed and possibly even undercut if there were essentially too many cooks in the kitchen. And this plays to a point that I'm going to emphasize again in a moment, and then perhaps again later. And that is that this bill is narrowly focused, and it was narrowly focused for a very specific and very important reason: to keep things simple and to keep them direct. Now, in order to make that happen, Hill staff came directly to Iiusa. We are the Eb5 Industry Trade Association, and they asked us for a team that could help them work to develop a draft as efficiently as possible and focused exclusively on what are loosely called integrity measures in the draft. We also received and still do receive several inquiries about why that's the case. Why is this bill so narrow? Why does it only include integrity measures and a reauthorization, a long-term reauthorization? And again, in the interest of transparency and making sure we're all on the same page, it is narrow because that is the way Hill staffers and the most vested members of Congress, Senator Leahy and Senator Grassley, wanted it to be. To their credit, they recognize that EB5 industry unity on the myriad of issues that go toward supporting and making the EB5 program run, that it's been very difficult over the last many, many years to actually reach unity. And what I'm talking about are technical issues that many of you are very familiar with. Some of you may not be so familiar with. There really are many of them to discuss, but not the least of which would be, for example, the definition of targeted employment area or the investment amounts. There are simply too many contentious issues to put into an important reauthorization measure. It would end up tying up the conversation. We would end up having to unwind it, pick it back up, rewind it, pick your analogy. There was just simply too much to cover. So Hill staff came to the most comprehensive representative of EB5, Iiusa, again, to put this program on a track toward progress. And that is to say simply this: get this thing reauthorized for 5 years, providing stability in the program and the confidence for regional centers to continue investing in communities, and clean it up. I address the issues of integrity and the issues of oversight and the issues of fraud that have really wreaked havoc on the program in the past. Simple, straightforward, solid, something to get this done and to get us moving along. So along those lines, the timeline, just so you understand the major events, these negotiations that the Hill asked us to participate in were successful. They included, obviously, industry representatives, obviously congressional staff. They also included dialogue with the administration, and the text that is available now, it's available on an Iiusa website, is many say probably the best integrity package that's been provided to the industry in years. So that was the first thing that happened. The 5-year reauthorization is really seen as a good government bill, and it was set to pass along with the year-end federal appropriations measures towards the end of 2020. But it was scuttled at the last minute. And I think perhaps the biggest reason why is that there was simply not enough time for a lot of members and a lot of staff to review a 100-page document that was to be added on to an appropriations bill. The third thing that took place of relevance, and it's really worth emphasizing here, is that for some reason, and I've heard too many stories about it to articulate any of them with confidence, but for some reason the program was given a very short time frame for ultimate reauthorization, and furthermore, it was decoupled. That's the fourth thing I want to point to. It was decoupled from the appropriations process. For years previous, the EB5 Regional Center program has always been tied to an appropriations measure, something that must pass. and therefore our reauthorization was held in great confidence. This was something that must pass. It's tied to something that must pass. So we too will be reauthorized. However, in the process of the end of the year negotiations in 2020, the reauthorization date was set for June 30th, 2021. And more importantly and more existentially, the program is no longer tied to any piece of legislation that must pass. There will be no lapse at the end of June 30, 2020, unless the program is reauthorized. This job creation juggernaut really will simply cease to exist. The ramifications of that we will discuss in a few minutes. Just a couple of other dates so that you're fully aware. It was August when we began negotiations. December 8th, Iiusa's board voted unanimously, representing 95, 99% of the Eb5 regional center industry to support the Grassley-Leahy bill, and Iiusa still holds that position. And then to the mid-December, around the 11th, Iiusa sent a letter to Congress with broad support for reauthorizing this program because of the economic impact it can have. And I'm confident that there's probably more than a handful of you out there today on this webinar that were supportive then, and we hope you'll be supportive in the future. So I hope that answers a lot of questions, or at least paints the picture of where we ended at 2020, why we ended up where we ended up, and sets the stage for what will happen next. Now, it's not just the political realities of where we ended up, it's also the political realities that we have going forward. There was also an election in the meanwhile, and so I'm grateful to our lobbyists, Keith Pemrick and George McElwee, who can walk us through some of the realities that we have in the new Congress and with the new administration. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you making time today out of your schedule to be with us. I think Aaron did a great job of recapping kind of what we were doing kind of mid last year and through the rest of that Congress on that legislation and what our hopes would be now, obviously looking into the next this next Congress that we're currently in. Just as Aaron said, there was an election. So with we have a new administration. And with a new administration, we have new faces and new priorities. With State Department, I'm sure many of you already know these things, but we'll just kind of go over them pretty quickly. We have a Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was confirmed on January 26th with a 78-22 vote. And then yesterday, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was confirmed with a vote of 56-43. There were some concerns going through the nomination and his confirmation hearing, and then even yesterday with even a potential with his vote, just because of some of his interactions previously when he was USCIS director. There were a number of Republicans that were saying that they were going to oppose his confirmation. They withdrew that opposition, and 6 Republicans joined the Democrats in voting for that confirmation. Those 6 Democrats are Senators Capito, Collins, Murkowski, Sullivan, Romney, and Portman. So we're very happy that he's now in place and we can be moving forward. With USCIS, it's not official, but there has been some considerations by President Biden to nominate Era Jardot to be the USCIS director. If you're not familiar with her, she served as the chief counsel at USCIS for 3 years under the Obama administration. And so we'll be looking forward, if it is her, to be working with her and USCIS on some of the issues, and not just with reauthorization, but also just the things that we're dealing with times backlog and things of that nature. With any new administration, you're also going to have a different posture on a number of issues, and that includes immigration. For the past 4 years, we had seen a very hardline approach from the Trump administration. I think we've already seen how that the current administration, the Biden administration, is working to really overturn a lot of the executive orders that were in place. And even with yesterday, there were 3 executive orders, 2 or 3 executive orders that were signed to repeal back and pull back some of the ones that were put in place by President Trump. But there also has been a good bit of media attention put on to President Biden and his desire to want a more comprehensive immigration reform. That includes, I mean, that's across the spectrum. So it's everything from DACA, and he said we go through all the employment-based, and then we would be hopefully seeing things in there. Some of the indications that are coming out that they would be looking at is some backlog relief, and then even potentially the not counting of derivatives, which actually really help the EB5 industry. We are having conversations, and then we would hopefully be having more conversations to find out what would be in that as we go forward. I'm going to pass it over to my partner, Keith Pemrick, and he's going to talk a little bit about Congress.
Thanks, George. Even though there was a presidential election that took up most of the oxygen leading up to November and after November, there were also congressional elections, and the dynamics have changed significantly in the Senate and altered a bit in the House. So the Senate will go from Republican leadership to now Democratic leadership as far as the majority. The Senate breakdown is 50-50. There are 2 independents that caucus with the Democrats. So Chuck Schumer from New York is the new majority leader of the Senate, and Dick Durbin from Illinois is the new majority whip in the Senate. And he's also significant because he is the incoming chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. In the past few years, we've dealt with Senator Leahy and Senator Feinstein as ranking members who have been more engaged / vocal on EB5 issues. And now Senator Durbin, who is very engaged on immigration as a whole, will be overseeing EB5 legislation through the Senate. Senator McConnell will move to minority leader from Kentucky, and Senator Thune from South Dakota will be the minority whip. At 50-50, actually, Senator Schumer and McConnell came to an agreement today on a power sharing, and it's modeled after the 2001 power sharing model that Senators Trent Lott and Tom Daschle came to an agreement on. That lasted for about 6 months, which was the last time we had a 50-50 split in the Senate. For those who were paying attention then, Jim Jeffords from Vermont switched from Republican to caucus with the Democrats, so that only lasted about 6 months. But basically, the committee will be equal numbers, Democrats and Republicans, equal budgets, equal staff, et cetera. A tie vote in a committee would move legislation to the floor. So Vice President Kamala Harris would be the deciding vote in a full Senate should the vote be 50-50. In the House, the Democrats retain control, yet their margin became more narrow as far as their majority goes. The current number is 221 to 211 Democrats, Republicans, with 3 outstanding seats. One of those is New York 22, which has been drawn out in the court since Election Day between incumbent Anthony Brindisi, the Democrat, and Republican challenger Claudia Tenney, who had the seat prior to Brindisi. It looks like Tenney will win. And then the other 2 seats are both in Louisiana. One is Cedric Richmond, who moved to the Biden administration, a Democrat, which in all likelihood will remain in Democratic hands. And Luke Letlow, tragically, after his first election to Congress, died of COVID, so that his seat is open. That will likely stay in Republican hands. So we're looking at a 222 to 213 House, which is a very narrow margin, as Speaker Pelosi, who retains her speakership, can only lose 4 Democrats to keep her number at 218 once the House is full again at 435 members. As far as the Judiciary Committee goes, Congressman Nadler from New York City will remain the chairman, and Jim Jordan from Ohio will be the ranking member. He took over as ranking member at the end of last Congress when Congressman Collins from Georgia decided to run for Senate. Nadler and Jordan are kind of polar opposites. Nadler is very liberal from New York City. Jordan is a leader of the Freedom Caucus. So we anticipate that they will be butting heads a lot. but Zoe Lofgren stays as chairwoman of the Immigration Subcommittee, and we've already had initial conversations with her staff. Just to go back to the Senate, I glanced over, Charles Grassley from Iowa will be the ranking member on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He was chairman prior to last Congress, and then he went over to the Senate Finance Committee. He's coming back to be ranking on Judiciary. So someone else who has been very engaged in EB5 issues. And I think, and the last thing I'll say about Congress is based on our conversations, it looks like when it comes to macro immigration, Senator Menendez from New Jersey and Congresswoman Linda Sanchez from California, from the Los Angeles area, will be the running point in their respective chambers on macro immigration legislation. This is interesting because neither sit on their respective judiciary committees, but both are Hispanic and members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. So it points, that the Congressional Hispanic Caucus is going to have a very large role in immigration policy moving forward in the 117th Congress. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Keith. I appreciate that, and we will be working with and communicating with Senators Menendez and Representative Sanchez's office on this Biden proposal that they are helping construct. I'm going to leave it here, and I'm going to turn over to Steve Yellair and also Robert Devine to take over for the next slide.
Great. So Robert and I are going to tag team. First, we're going to talk about Eb5 Purgatory, and I'll take the lead on that because I still hope to get to Eb5 heaven someday. But Robert is in the trenches with Eb5 litigation, and so he's already in Eb5 hell, so I'll let him take the lead on talking about that, but we'll go back and forth on it. First, we're all worried about the possibility that the Eb5 program may lapse as of June 30th if Congress does not do anything. And so we've been doing some research on what has happened in the past when it has lapsed. And if we could go to the next slide, you'll see a great chart that Suzanne Lazicki created where she has put together visually all the times that the Eb5 program has been reauthorized. And it's hard to read on the screen here, but if you go to the actual chart, you'll see some various times where the program did lapse. Usually it was just for a couple of days, maybe at the end of September into early October. The longest lapse was in December of 2018 until January 25th of 2019. You may all remember that from the general government shutdown that happened at that time. And as part of that general government shutdown, USCIS also stopped doing most EB5 things. They put out some information at the time saying that they were going to suspend operations on EB5. They were going to put unadjudicated I-526 petitions on hold until the government went back up. And they said that they still wanted regional centers, however, to file their I-924A annual reports at that time. We also looked at some prior times, and there were some stakeholder meetings, for example, in March of 2009, where the question was asked generally, what happens if Congress fails to renew the EB5 program? At that time, the USCIS was pretty wishy-washy and said, well, we're not exactly sure what we're going to do if there is a lapse. We'll probably hold unadjudicated regional center proposals and regional center affiliated I-526 petitions for the time being while there is a lapse. But we're not quite sure what we'll do other than that. In January of 2012, Suzanne Lazicki noted an exchange where a stakeholder asked, what procedures would the USCIS follow at that time? And they just gave sort of a vague statement that we'll have to figure it out when we do it. The general theme that you get from looking at Suzanne Lazicki's excellent chart is that Congress over time has been giving shorter and shorter extensions to the EB5 regional center program. At the very beginning, we got like a 5-year reauthorization, but recently it's only been for a year or sometimes only 6 months. So that shows that we do need to be concerned about the fact that EB5 may not be reauthorized June 30th, particularly because now it's been decoupled with other immigration programs that traditionally have all gone together when reauthorization occurs. And with that, let Robert take over and talk about EB5 hell if the Congress fails to reauthorize it as of June 30th, and then I'll add some other comments. Robert?
Sure, thanks. So if the regional center legislation does expire and is not renewed, then here's what EB5 hell looks like as to any investor in any project that was dependent on counting indirect jobs and sponsored by a regional center. First, there would be no new I-526 filings whatsoever, and no new investments based on counting indirect jobs and regional center sponsorship. Any such I-526 petitions that were pending would be denied. Any I-526 approvals that were out there for an investor who had not already been admitted as a conditional permanent resident would be revoked. It's not clear what would happen with people who had an immigrant visa already issued to them, but had not already used that visa to enter the United States. That's kind of not been clear in the previous statements that the agency has made, and who knows what they would do now, but there would be serious risk that those would also be revoked. Any pending adjustment of status application by somebody with an approved I-526 would be denied, and their interim work and travel documents would be revoked. All regional center designations would be rendered meaningless. Conditional permanent residence is the one piece of apparent happy news. People who had already obtained admission as a conditional resident would be able to keep their status and file their I-829 and become a legal permanent resident, as long as they could show that the money was properly spent and the jobs were created, and ostensibly without regard to any regional center designation. Any family member who had stayed behind and had not immigrated would lose out. They would not be able to come because the category that they would be coming for was over. That's what a permanent non-renewal of the legislation looks like. I want to point out, though, that even a temporary expiration, if it were to occur now, hurts the program and the people involved with it significantly more than any temporary expiration has done before. First, this one is not based on a budget timeline. All of the other expirations, to my recollection, have been based on the fact that the legislation was tied to a budget timeline, and that there was not agreement on the budget, and everybody reasonably expected that the budget would be enacted one day. The government would not be permanently shut down, and that EB5 and the other immigration programs that tend to get renewed along with it would be renewed. It was just a matter of when. So there was less concern that this would be really the cliff to fall off of. Two, there was far more protection of escrow in those days. Now, very few investors that I'm aware of actually have their money protected through an escrow agreement that is there until they get a visa. That's almost never ever occurred. In fact, the escrow agreements that ever were normally were until the I-526 was approved. Well, escrow could have, but anyway, hardly anybody even gets that anymore. They get escrow maybe until the I-526 is filed, if at all. So people could have their money stuck in the deal, is the point. And finally, there are infinitely more people waiting for visa numbers than there were in most of those temporary shutdowns. So unlike in the previous times, now there would be tons of people who would be truly shocked to truly fear that their capital will be stuck in the projects that due to COVID may be stalling while they lose all the immigration benefits they invested for. That shock will ripple through international news and tend to stifle EB5 participation by investors, even if the program is revived, because people will now suddenly have a moment of realization that in order for me to get a green card based on making this investment, if I'm especially subject to waits for a visa number, I have to live through however many extensions of this temporary legislation that will need to occur, all the way to the point that I get a visa number, get a visa, and have either enter the country or granted adjustment of status. That is a shocking reality.
So 2 points to add to that. One, somebody just asked a good question, and that is, we want to clarify that we're talking about the EB5 Regional Center program, which is the largest part by far of the overall EB5 program. The EB5 Direct program would continue after June 30th. And so those investors who do a direct EB5 investment in their own projects would still be able to do that. But the Regional Center program, which probably accounts for 99% of all investments in the EB5 program, would go away. I also want to point out that I've gotten some questions from people like, well, you know, so if we fail to reauthorize by June 30th, you know, Congress will come around by September 30th as part of the budget and put us back in. So it's not the end of the world, is it, Steve, if we have a 3-month lapse? And I disagree. I think for all the reasons that Robert has just pointed out so eloquently, this is a different kind of a lapse because it is not tied to the budget. And 3 months would be by far the longest lapse. And again, it would send shockwaves across the world because investors would realize that, you know, they may see other lapses and their hard-earned money may be stuck in the project without them being able to get a green card. So it is a real problem and we need to face that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the person who's doing the next slide.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Robert. That person is me. So I'll do my best to follow you guys. So the big question now is, how do we keep this program from expiring? You know, in addition to the global impact that it would have on investors and immigrant investors in the system already, we're also talking about a huge chilling effect on investments into community projects that create jobs and stimulate the economy, which is something that we desperately need right now. So again, the question, how do we keep this program from expiring? And I can tell you, there are 2 schools of thought. Recall earlier, I mentioned that Iiusa represents 99% of the regional centers and the entire EB5 community. There are a handful of regional centers who are not members of Iiusa who take a bit of a different approach. The approach that Iiusa strongly advocates is a good government approach, and I'll explain that in a moment. Others, a few others, represent something they refer to as the grand bargain. And a question some of you may be asking is, well, you know, if we need to reauthorize this, Aaron, and Iiusa is endorsing a good government strategy, why are we even talking about the grand bargain? And to tell you the truth, I would like there to be full disclosure. I want everybody who is involved in this process to understand every aspect of what we are grappling with. The notion of a grand bargain is definitely out there. We also feel, Iiusa and the regional center community also feels that because the grand bargain may be an overreach at this point in time, that we need to protect against a strategy that may end up cutting off our nose despite our face. So let me move on to the next slide and explain more precisely what I'm talking about between the different perspectives of how to reauthorize the EB5 Regional Center program. On one side, you see what Iiusa is endorsing, good government. This is representative. This represents the legislation that Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy developed towards the end of 2020. And on the other side is the notion of the grand bargain. The gist of the grand bargain perspective is that if we hold out from passing essentially the integrity bill, the Grassley-Leahy good government bill, we would be able to secure more of what the EB5 Regional Center program needs, because we would be able to leverage our reluctance to pass these basic reforms. However, seeking consensus from all the regional programs, all the regional centers on these issues is and has proven to be very difficult. We're talking about sticky issues like the definition of targeted employment area, the cost differential between how much is invested in a TEA and how much is invested in a non-TEA. And the problem that Iiusa sees here, and I believe many others do as well, is that getting into a negotiation for a grand bargain with a paltry 5 months between now and our existential termination is just not something that Iiusa feels is tenable. To the point, we don't have enough time to negotiate a grand bargain. Good government bill is simply that. It's clean, it's straightforward, it does what Congress and those who are most invested in the EB5 Regional Center program want it to do. It reestablishes the Regional Center program, provides functioning, it provides operable oversight, it protects good faith investors, it protects lawful operating stakeholders, it stabilizes the program with a 5-year runway to begin having conversations that are already being seeded by the Biden administration. And it allows us to engage these conversations from a stable platform with clean hands. So, and there is a lot to discuss, from that platform, not the least of which would be additional visas and an effort to redress processing times. So in a nutshell, those are the two sides, those are the two perspectives, good government and grand bargain. So let me give you a little bit more detail as to why we support and hope you agree that good government is the way to reauthorize this program before June 30th. Iiusa understands the immense need and the value of addressing the complicated issues that I just outlined. We embrace the idea of including, for example, rural set-asides in a reauthorization project. We definitely endorse immigration reform that will provide more visas to the EB5 category. And as I mentioned, on this point, we are anxiously awaiting the final legislation that Representative Sanchez and Senator Martinez drop with regards to comprehensive immigration reform. Please do not misunderstand Iiusa's full support and endorsement of Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy's good government approach as the industry's rejection of any of these other goals or debates. We do not reject them. The fact of the matter is we just don't have the time to get them done. And in addition to that, the good government bill is the only bill in town. We don't have anything else to develop or advocate around. None of these other matters were even on the table, as I mentioned, for discussion, and introducing them created a non-starter for the members, Senators Grassley and Senator Leahy, who seem to care most about the program. If integrity is reestablished and the program is endorsed by Congress and stabilized in the marketplace with a long-term reauthorization, these matters can be revisited with vigor, just not now. So, quick question that I'm sure some of you are asking, and I'd like to ask my colleague Adam Green to answer. What are some of the specifics that make this such an important bill? What are some of the specifics that we feel from an integrity perspective would actually strengthen the program? So Adam, if I could turn it over to you for a few moments to maybe address that, I would greatly appreciate your time.
Thanks, Aaron. And I want to direct everyone to an excellent section by section summary that Carolyn Lee prepared and Iiusa published back in December. And I think it is, or it will be posted on a new website, which I know we're going to describe later, called saveandcreatejobs.org. So I want to get a plug-in for that website and refer everyone to Carolyn's summary also. So while much of this bill deals with what we've been describing as integrity measures, there are also some other important elements. So to give a little bit of a roadmap, the meat of the bill is in the bill's section 2, and that section actually just adds on to the existing Eb5 law with a bunch of subparagraphs. And as Aaron noted, the integrity measures were reviewed in detail by many sets of eyes, including regional center operators, immigration lawyers, securities counsel, some developer JCE sponsors, and a lot of lobbyists. And for Iiusa's part, we think we were able to get appropriate language accepted that balanced the bill. So industry players will have additional responsibilities, but those additional responsibilities are going to be limited to what an industry player could reasonably be expected to do. So notably, the staffers, the legislative staffers, were very firm, but they were very reasonable. It was important to them that the sponsors and industry players did indeed take responsibility for some oversight, but they did appreciate what was commercially possible and reasonable. But in addition to the integrity measures, one of the most important and favorable accomplishments for industry players and really for Eb5 petitioners was what are in the new Section M protections for good faith investors. If a regional center is terminated or an NCE or JCE is debarred, petitioners have some ways to salvage their immigration process. Petitioners can file amendments to affiliate with a new regional center or even to associate with a new NCE. They can invest more if needed to satisfy job creation, but more importantly, if they otherwise satisfy job creation requirements, they can just notify USCIS or associate with a new entity without investing more. And also Section M allows investors to retain priority dates, and it protects their children from age out for a period of time. Section N was an extension of the main meat of the bill dealing with integrity measures, and Section N gives the government latitude to deny petitions for threats to the national interest. Importantly here, we were able to get a provision that the government needs to give an explanation to a US-owned regional center, NCE or JCE, if they're terminated or debarred for this national interest reason, unless, of course, that info is classified or restricted. There's a Section Q that was added that provides a requirement for fund administration, but it also waives the requirement if an NCE is audited or associated with a broker-dealer. And there are some additional procedures for JCEs that are affiliated with NCEs, which seemed reasonable. So other than Section 2 of the bill adding all of those subparagraphs, other sections provide for definitions and process clarifications. I see that David Mars asked a couple of questions about the exhaustion of administrative remedies before going to court, and several people have commented on this. And while staff really wants to lock down all the language in the bill, I know that Iiusa hopes to request some things that that would qualify as really technical changes based on feedback from a lot of people. And we do hope to make a technical request here right now, just limiting the amount of time that those administrative processes have to be concluded. So that would be a compromise where we still have to go through the administrative process, but there would be a reasonable period of time. Now, importantly, Section 6 of the bill requires a fee study, and there might be something here. So it requires USCIS to do a fee study to find out what the fees would have to be to get petitions adjudicated in a timely manner. And this would be great for the industry because it might actually lead to better processing times. And finally, Section 7, the last section of the bill, formalizes the channels of communication and the limitations for any type of favoritism. And this really doesn't change anything, but it does satisfy a lot of people in government and legislators who wanted to formalize the safeguards. So overall, while the bill has been labeled an integrity bill, there's some good trade-offs in there. And the industry can get some good things if everything is implemented properly. And I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Adam. So what is the plan going forward? It's basically a three-pronged approach. Shoe leather, there is simply no substitute for hard work. Education, we plan on working with our relationships in the media to let folks know about the economic impact that EB5 has on their communities. And we plan to establish a new coalition. What will that look like? Well, as I said, we are supporting the good government position taken by Senators Grassley and Leahy. And shoe leather element is engaging members, of course, members of the association, and of course, members of the EB5 community writ large. We need to be able to consistently demonstrate economic impact, that this program is something that creates jobs in communities that matter to the policymakers on Capitol Hill. And we need to easily, and we can with this bill, demonstrate integrity, that this program is self-policing, that this program is working to expunge and prohibit bad apples. To save the EB5 program as well, Iiusa must demonstrate the program's ability to create jobs. I mentioned that, and we sent that earlier letter to Congress that had broad support. And we are now hoping to bring those supporters back into the fold, to reconstitute that coalition with some formality and with some very specific goals. This organization, as formal as it will be, is a no-cost organization for individuals and communities and companies and associations to join, to demonstrate their support for reauthorizing a good government EB5 program before June 30th. So I'd like to perhaps debut that effort now and turn it over to my colleague Lee to discuss a little bit of his work and how he developed the Coalition to Save and Create Jobs and how you can join and be helpful.
Thank you, Aaron. Happy to talk about this, and we are very excited about this new initiative for the plug. So we want to make sure that everyone is staying in the heaven and not going to the EB5 hell after June 30th. But first of the foremost, as Aaron indicated, joining the new coalition is free. Being part of this new initiative to support the EB5 Regional Center program costs nothing. Because we would like to have as many organizations as possible that is outside of the EB5 traditional community to ensure that the regional center program continues beyond June 30th. We also make it very easy to become part of this new initiative. As you can see that on the slide, just go to saveandcreatejobs.org/join. Just fill out a very short form on this page. And then you will become a proud member of the coalition that support job creations through the EB5 Regional Center. By the way, the form is very short. It only took me like 10 seconds to finish that, and I look forward to hearing someone to break my record. Please reach out to your business partners and economic development agencies in your local area, the Chamber of Commerce, or even your mayor. Encourage them to join these new coalitions to demonstrate the support of the EB5 program is broad and wide And then if you need any statistics or any information to demonstrate the economic impact of EB5 in your local area, please do not hesitate to contact us. And I think this is all I have for today. I will turn it back to Aaron, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing the Coalition to Save and Create Jobs grow exponentially in the coming weeks, demonstrating to policymakers on Capitol Hill that it's not just the EB5 community that is engaged in reauthorizing this program, but others that it impacts will make a huge difference to how they view the program and what they'll do about it. So what will we hope you do? Obviously, get involved. You can do so by joining the Coalition to Save and Create Jobs. Previously, there was a few notes on a subsequent slide that indicates questions, no bill or yes bill. We were unsure as to whether or not the Senate would have been organized by today, allowing them to introduce legislation. But we know now, as of this morning, that the Senate has adopted an organizational statement. So we do anticipate Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy introducing their bill imminently. When that happens, it will obviously open the floodgate for us with regards to activity. And we really want you to be part of that. Get people to add their names to the Coalition, including your own. Reach out to your stakeholder and business partners. If you have been involved in a project, for example, with a hotel chain, and you feel that hotel chain has benefited from the work that you've done, or the community in which it was constructed, reach out to your community, reach out to the Chamber of Commerce there, reach out to the mayor's office, reach out to the companies that have been part of your commercial enterprise, and have them join the Coalition to Save and Create Jobs. Finally, I just want to make a small pitch before I open it up to questions for anybody on the call to join Iiusa this April on the 6th and 7th. We have an advocacy summit that will take a much deeper dive into the situation as it will have developed between now and then regarding this reauthorization. We look forward to sharing new information and articulating new progress and sharing the media hits that we've been able to place. Registration for that summit can happen right there at iiusa.org/2021 Advocacy Summit. And with that, we have a formal end of our presentation. However, I do understand that there are questions, and we would certainly be able to answer as many as possible. I'll turn it back over to Ashley to facilitate some of that Q&A, and if I'm needed, I will jump back on. Ashley?
Thanks, Aaron. We have quite a few questions here, so we'll try to get to all of them. But we'll start here. Is there a significant difference between Democrats and Republicans as far as who is more amenable to EB5?
It's a good question. I have an answer, but let me defer to our lobbyists, George and Keith, possibly to give something boots on the ground perspective of that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we have, over the past couple of years, we've done numerous meetings on the Hill, and what we've been trying to do is raise the profile of the program, the Regional Center program. I think there has been such a focus during the last few Congresses to really have our attention put on the Judiciary Committees and leadership of the leadership of both House and the Senate to try to get the reauthorization done. But what we've been doing, and I think why we had success even getting it to where we had to last year, is that we really broadened that support to where we had in December, we had 10 members of the House, 5 Republicans, or I forget, it was a breakdown, it was a bipartisan letter sent to the Appropriations Committee ranking and chairman, saying, please reauthorize this program and institute integrity reforms. So we've been able to do that. So I wouldn't say that there's a major difference. What it is it's education. And I think when we've talked about just a few moments ago about getting individuals to sign up and to support our new coalition to save and create jobs, that's where it's important for when you are, look, who are you working with? Those mayors, the chambers of commerce, the economic development officials. Those are the ones that are actually going to help us. So when they sign up or they become supportive of the integrity reforms and the reauthorization, we're able to take those supporters and by name and take them to offices that may not have much of a dealing or even have much background in Eb5, or maybe even not even what the program is. And so then we can show them the importance of it. So while there may be some differences, I think when we actually have it where there's local support, grassroots activity from those organizations that say we need this economic development, especially after COVID, or as we're still dealing with COVID and the recovery, those dollars and those jobs saved and created will be vital.
Thanks, George. Steve, did you have something you wanted to say? I see you just popped up. Maybe that was by accident. While I have you, George, and potentially Keith, we have a question here. Does reauthorization require 50 votes or 60 votes? Do you expect this to be an urban-rural divide or a Democratic-Republican divide?
Well, I would think first that just, looking at that, it's not going to, I wouldn't think it would be a standalone bill, which would say require the 60 votes in the Senate for cloture. Our hope is that we would find other pieces of legislation that are out there once we've now, the goal would be is to get this introduced by Senators Grassley and Leahy, have a companion bill introduced in the House. And then over the next few months, we would be going out and soliciting and asking for members to support the bill to sign as co-sponsors. When we build up that level of support, we're able to then go to leadership or the House Judiciary and Senate Judiciary Committees and say, what else, where could we be taking this bill? We have, we've been having growing support for the bill. Where can we attach this to for when it would go for final passage? So that would kind of be, I don't necessarily see this as a standalone bill. So we would need to find other opportunities.
This is, I'll add my quick thought to there. I definitely do not think that this is an urban versus rural, nor do I think it's really Democrat versus Republican. The program itself originally passed, the Regional Center program originally created by Congress was an economic development program. And I think that anybody is hard pressed to say that economic development is not something that's critical right now. Toward the end of last year, there was a significant number of bipartisan members of both the House and the Senate that were perfectly fine with the bill that we developed. I think that if there is any pushback or difference of opinion, as I mentioned, it's probably more along the lines of good government versus grand bargain. Ultimately, however, the position that Iiusa is taking is wide open to all issues, excuse me, as soon as we stabilize the program.
Thanks, Aaron. Our next question would be either for Steve or Robert. Is there sorry, let me start over. If there is a 3-month lapse, would people have to resubmit their applications when the program comes back? If and when the program comes back?
You don't know for sure because we don't have definitive guidance from USCIS, but based on my 30 years of immigration law experience, I would think yes, that they would deny the petition or simply say we're not accepting it, and people would have to reapply once the program got reauthorized.
If the petition was already filed, in the past, USCIS has held those in abeyance in anticipation of a congressional reauthorization. Don't know if that's going to happen this time. That would be a USCIS discretionary decision. They would have the authority to just deny everything in the book, but they might, and I think probably would hold in abeyance for some period of time, 3 to 6 months maybe. and see what happens.
This is George. If I could just add, and I'm not going to go into the legal side of it because I can't offer anything there, but I would say when we talk about lapse, it does also give an indication that we think that it would be reauthorized again, and that there's some other pending legislation out there that would actually take us past the June 30th into somewhere where we would maybe be put back onto the appropriations process. And we cannot guarantee that. We have to think that the program is not being reauthorized, so it is stopping at June 30th. And so while we may be working toward that as we get closer and closer to that date, if we have to look to extending it, or we're trying to work with extending, there is no guarantee that Congress will do that. Right now, we have to work with that June 30th deadline. That's why it's so important for us to kind of gain those supporters now. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw a question up there about Iiusa's meeting with the CIS Ombudsman, and I just wanted to address that really quickly. We had a meeting that was supposed to be yesterday, and we had intended on updating attendees here today on that meeting, but unfortunately that had to be rescheduled. So we will be meeting with the CIS Ombudsman in about 2 weeks. I believe it's the 17th. So once we have a debrief from that meeting, you can check Iiusa's blog and we'll certainly provide any updates there. But thank you to everyone who submitted questions and comments and concerns for us to address at that meeting. The next question, how about, was there a reason for the decoupling of Eb5 from spending bills?
I don't know. I can theorize, and George and Keith and others, are welcome to do so as well. But I can theorize that it was done as both a carrot and a stick, an impetus for all stakeholders involved to, at this stage of the game, put up or shut up. Get your act together. You now have until June 30th, and there's no safety net after that. What's it going to be? That's just a supposition. I was not part of the conversations among leaders in the House and Senate that came to that conclusion. We've debriefed as best we can with Senate staff on what their theories are, but they generally jive with the notion that in order to actually get this done once and for all, we're going to try to make this a bit, we're going to turn the screws a little bit. And furthermore, we're not going to attach it to an appropriations bill that can be negotiated quietly behind closed doors. This is something that will have to be introduced and debated and done so in the sunshine with regards to any issues that the agency or the members of the Eb5 community want to address. Those are my best guesses, and I dare say that if we approach this correctly, we have fallen as much into a wonderful opportunity as we have hit a hurdle.
Our next question is, Aaron's post said, quote, the EB5 program's 5-year reauthorization good government integrity bill was teed up to pass along with the year-end federal spending bill, but was pulled from the package prior to the final vote, end quote. Any insight into who pulled it and how to prevent the same pull operating again next time?
No insights. I think that would be, appropriate to share. I have my suppositions as to who pulled it, and my guess is, again, it goes to those who believe that we are selling ourselves short and that we have an opportunity to get so much more for the program. But that is pure speculation on my part. It could very well simply have been, as has been related to us by Hill staff, that we were providing a 100-page addition to an omnibus bill toward the very end of the process. and there simply was not enough time for staff to review it and feel comfortable in placing it on the omnibus. So I think technically and in reality, the folks who pulled it were House and Senate leadership. And my guess is it's probably a combination of all of the above, but we have definitely heard from House committee staff that they just didn't see that they had enough time to review the complete legislation.
Thank you. Our next question is, would the president's EO issued yesterday regarding strengthening integration provide cover to reluctant legislators to defer action until after the Domestic Policy Council's 180-day review?
Can you repeat that question? And I'm wondering if this may be something for Steve or Robert to address.
Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, we don't know for sure, but there's a difference between an executive order and a statute. Right now, Congress has passed a law that says that the EB5 Regional Center program ends June 30th. The executive order yesterday says, well, we should review legal immigration, but that doesn't set aside and cannot undo what Congress has passed as the law of the land, which is that EB5 Regional Center program ends June 30th. So I don't think that action yesterday will have an impact in the technical sense of somehow being able to prevent the lapse by itself. Now, maybe there'll be some political considerations, but not from a technical legal perspective.
Thank you, Steve. Our next question is, what do you see as the specific education priorities to build support for reauthorization? What particular misconceptions or areas of ignorance need to be targeted in Congress in order to build support?
This is George. I'll answer that. I think I wouldn't necessarily go right now at the misconceptions. I think what it is, it's awareness. And I think what we need to be doing is bringing the awareness to Congress that the program will expire and then the ramifications of that expiration. And that's where I'll go back to again is the grassroots support. We're doing what we can on Capitol Hill, but we need more voices, and something that we were doing late last year and we will now do with this new coalition to save and create jobs is to really develop that broad base outside of the EB5 industry, but other association, other industries that may benefit from EB5 and bring them into the fold too. That will help us raise the awareness of EB5 and its importance to our recovery.
Thank you, George. Here's a question that came up, I believe, during Steve or Robert's address. It says, would grandfathering not apply for any pending petitions? I'm assuming based on a lapse or a termination of the program.
No, there is no grandfathering in the termination of the authorization from legislation. When the legislation dies, every benefit that comes from it dies, except for probably for people who have been admitted as a conditional resident already.
Thank you.
The only discretion the agency has is whether to hold them in abeyance until giving some reasonable additional time for extending legislation to be enacted. But at some point, they have to pull the plug.
Thank you. Can the Biden administration's focus on passing comprehensive immigration threaten that EB5 will not be earnestly considered until a deal is struck for all immigration?
George, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. We don't know. I would say we don't know if that would happen. I guess what I'll say again is what we have, we know that is potentially out there with the comprehensive immigration reform, and that's why we've mentioned Senator Menendez and Representative Sanchez working on that type of larger package. And so we will do our best to work with them on our priorities. And that's what that's definitely will be part of what we're doing. However, as we've learned, even with this proposal that President Biden is proposing, there is not some unanimous support for it, that this is actually that this would get done. And we've known that the comprehensive immigration reform package has been tried multiple times. We hope that there would be success. President Biden sees success there this time, where we haven't seen it in the past, and we want to be part of that conversation. But what we do know is that there is a fact here, and that the program ends June 30th. And so we will work toward that, and the opportunities we have with, say, Grassley and Leahy and others that want to support that, to make sure that we have that reauthorization.
Thank you. We're getting up, some of these we have some comments more than questions on here. Let's see here. You noted earlier that the grand bargain side wants to capitalize on Chuck Schumer being the majority leader in the Senate. Does Schumer have any particular position on Eb5?
I don't recall saying that those that supported the grand bargain wanted to leverage Chuck Schumer. So I'm not, can you repeat the question, Ashley? I don't recall mentioning Senator Schumer.
Yeah, oops, sorry, I thought I was on mute. It says, you noted earlier that the grand bargain side wants to capitalize on Chuck Schumer being the majority leader in the Senate. Does Schumer have a particular position on Eb5?
From what I've been told, Senator Schumer has an incredible amount of to-dos on his plate, not the least of which is an impeachment trial that is happening very soon in the Senate. I think that Senator Schumer has a clear recognition that EB5 has been very good for New York and New York City, and I would assume that he would take that into serious consideration before the program was allowed to terminate. George, did you have a thought?
I was going to say that we know that he is very aware of the benefits to New York. I also think that he also would want to get something done, and making sure that the industry and also his members are all on the same page. And I think in making sure that sometimes we might need to look more narrow on some of the issues that have been debated over the years. And that's why we're focusing so heavily on the Grassley-Leahy bill. And so I think that there would be making sure that the bill was not introduced and was, formally last Congress. It wasn't added onto the Omni. So now getting it introduced formally in the Senate and in the House, we can actually coalesce that support around it. And that will actually kind of help with leadership, not just with Senator Schumer, but others in leadership to be supportive of that legislation.
Thank you. And it looks like we'll take one last question here. Do you have an advocacy role to suggest for past EB5 investors who depend on reauthorization?
Well, you could certainly join the Coalition to Save and Create Jobs. I think that that would be beneficial, as well as any of the organizations that you've worked with in the United States as part of your investment that have benefited commercially from your investment in the U.S.
Thank you, Aaron. I believe that wraps up our presentation for today. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email the email address you see there on your screen. Aaron, do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up here?
Simply to say thank you again to everybody who's participating. This has been one of the largest webinars that we have ever conducted. 300 plus registrants, and as I watched the participants down, we had more than half of those participate, and I'm sure many more will be able to take advantage of reviewing this information offline. So thank you to everybody who joined us. Many thanks to the panelists, to George, Keith, Steve, Robert, Lee, for your work in developing the website for the coalition. and that we're all looking forward to working with you towards a reauthorization before June 30th. So thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for attending and have a wonderful rest of your day.